Hi, welcome to the Optimising Your Brilliance podcast, where we get to the source of what makes people brilliant and explore how to eradicate the barriers that stop you from shining. By shining, I mean being at your absolute best in both work and life. You'll hear from business and thought leaders who bear all and share their insider secrets, along with my episodes focused on optimising your performance, productivity, success and well-being. My name is Estelle Read, founder of Be, executive coach, speaker and best-selling author of Inner Brilliance, Outer Shine, 10 Antidotes to Imposter Syndrome, Workaholism and Stress. So if you're ready to take your work life to the next level, let's begin. Hello, can you do me a favour? Would you mind either liking or subscribing wherever it is that you listen? So maybe that's on YouTube or Spotify or Apple, because that will help us to keep going and keep growing. The other thing that would be really helpful is if you could share it with someone that would also benefit from the content. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Right, let's get on. So welcome everyone. I have been thinking about you, your year, and maybe what you want for next year. Because let's face it, sometimes we get to the end of a year and we think, what was all that about? What did I achieve? What didn't I achieve? And so with that in mind, I've been doing some research around why we self-sabotage, how we self-sabotage. And then I have designed a process over the last couple of years that's the counter to all of that. So in this episode, it's just me. The topic is how to stop self-sabotage and achieve your goals in 2026. So if this is you, then you're absolutely in the right place for this podcast. So maybe you have a bold goal, something that you're really determined to achieve, and I have got a way of you identifying whether it's something that you really want to achieve in a moment. I'll share that with you. But maybe it might even be that this year, because with the best will in the world, we don't always achieve all of our goals. So take, for example, one of my goals this year has obviously been to relaunch my podcast. That's really gone well. It's grown quicker than a lot of my competitor podcasts, and apparently you guys are listening a lot longer as well. So thank you again for liking, sharing, subscribing, and also listening. And if you've got, by the way, if you've got any feedback and you want to hear about a particular subject, or you want me to cover a subject, or maybe you have got a guest that you want me to interview, or maybe you want to come on yourself, drop me a line. Estelle Read, and Read is read in a book, estelleread.com. Drop me a line to Estelle at B, spelt with 3 E's.com. I'd love to hear from you. Right, so yeah, with the best will in the world, sometimes we don't always achieve our goals, do we? So podcast, that was a really good goal that has come to fruition. Dead pleased with that. I would say I have gone backwards a little bit in terms of my fitness regime. I'm picking that back up again at the moment, and I monitor it all, on my Apple Watch, all the statistics. And so I'm focused on pushing my VO2 max up. And I'm trying to think what the other statistic was that I'm looking at currently. Heart rate recovery, that was it. And it's interesting, is it? And this is one of the self-sabotage patterns, which I'll get onto, is that sometimes we take for granted how far we've come as well. And I guess I had taken for granted the fact that we were going up fells all the time, and then we had slackened off for weather, holiday reasons, and you break those habits. So being clear about what it is that you want to achieve is really important. You know, where you can, we know about boring old SMART objectives, but there's a lot of truth in that. What is it that you're measuring? Where is it that you're heading towards? Being clear about that, and then taking consistent effort. We're going to look at how we self-sabotage, how we break through those ceilings, because I don't know about you, do you ever, when you're trying to achieve something, sometimes you might bang your head on a level of performance and you get stuck and you think, well, you know, how do I take things to the next level? So we'll be looking at that. But, you know, you can listen to this episode either for yourself to set your goals for 2026, or maybe if you're in HR, because I work with a lot of HR professionals, in the legal industry, if you're a head of a department or a leader, you can use this process also to think about your departmental, your business goals as well. So you're absolutely in the right place if that sounds like you. So here's what's coming up. So I will be sharing with you the top 5 self-sabotage mistakes, and everything that I'm sharing with you is based on science. So I've done the scientific research and this is what the science tells us. As I say, this is when we start to reach this ceiling. And then thinking about your 2026 transformation. So I'll share with you my 5-step clear framework, which will prevent that self-sabotage. So the framework has been designed to, well, it's to design out that self-sabotage. So that you accelerate your goals and you achieve what it is that you set out to achieve. So I've got a little confession. After I'd finished recording this episode, it was that so long, I've had to chop it up into 2 parts. So you're still going to get exactly the same content, but in this episode, I'm going to be focusing on the hidden ceiling, keeping your goals out of reach. So focusing on those top 5 self-sabotaging mistakes. And in actual fact, that will give you time to reflect on those self-sabotaging mistakes so you can identify and think about some of the things that you might want to do differently, but it will also help inform part 2. So you will get part 2 in the next episode, where I will focus on your transformation for 2026. And I will share with you the 5-step clear framework so that you prevent that self-sabotage and accelerate your goal achievement. So this episode, like, sometimes I get a bit of a reputation with my clients for being a taskmaster. And that's because, you know, as a coach, the definition of insanity is keep doing what you're doing and expect a different result. And I remember when my book was first launched and other authors said to me, oh, wait until you get a 1-star review. And this 1-star review said, ugh, didn't like this book at all. Straight away, she's asking me to do things. But that's the reality, isn't it? We can sit and we can wait and hope that things will change, or we can choose to do things differently. And so today is about choosing to do things differently. I'll give you a route map so that you can plan that out for 2026. So take time for you, grab a cuppa, a pen, maybe you got a new journal for Christmas, a new pad. And then there'll be times when I'm going to ask you questions. So press pause, you know, really think about the answers to those questions, because within there, so when a coach asks you deep searching questions, what we're doing is what's referred to as a trans-derivational search. We're tapping into your unconscious mind, which is your storehouse of past experiences, memories, emotions, your values, your beliefs, what you really think. So if your immediate response is, I don't know, then that means the question is just ricocheted off and you've not allowed yourself to think deeply. So I would encourage you to think deeply. And if you want some inspiration for the kinds of things that you might want to achieve, here are some examples. So take, for example, one lawyer, they to be honest, they were at risk of dismissal. They weren't bringing in enough fee income. They increased the fee income by 300%. In another business, they were in a sticky spot because the industry was changing, the market conditions were challenging, and some of their methodologies had become staid and old-fashioned. So working out a strategic plan, a goal of goals, vision, getting the team behind that, they were able to go from 120 million to 140 million pounds, and that was in a downturn market. Then another coachee, for them, they had been putting off a conversation. So sometimes when we self-sabotage the thing that we want to achieve because we've got inner fears, and part of this process is letting go of those fears. And sometimes those fears make us behave irrationally because even though we know there are consequences, so take this client, the consequence of not having that difficult conversation, of letting that fear get in the way, was that it was costing the business £1 million a year. But literally, once we got rid of that fear, he went off and he had that conversation just like that. It was dead easy. Maybe it is that you want to be able to have difficult conversations with people, or like, for example, in another team that I'm working with, they've had a big push on holding team members accountable, but also having those difficult conversations. And it's been amazing how they've been able to push performance up. Some of the team members have been on cruise mode. And I think they're wondering what's hit them, like, oh my goodness, if I say I'm going to do something, then I've got to deliver it. So it's that kind of thing. And also, interestingly, so if having difficult conversations is a challenge for you, look at my last episode, which was published on Christmas Eve, and it's about having difficult conversations. I talk about how you give feedback. The reason I released it on Christmas Eve is I explained that the dynamics around the boardroom table, the meeting table, they're not dissimilar to the dynamics around the family Christmas table. Go and look that episode up if that's you, because I shared a model in terms of how to handle those conversations, but also explain why others behave like that, but also how we behave like that, and shared all sorts again of scientific models to help you make sense of it. Another example here, we've got a CEO, acting CEO, taken over an organisation, and they really left it in good shape by the time they exited that role, and they took their organisation from a £279,000 loss to a £250,000 profit. So again, if that's your business, if you've got some stretching targets that maybe you need to work on, this process will be useful for you. Or maybe it's about you just feeling comfortable in your own skin, not feeling like an imposter, being able to step out of your comfort zone to do and achieve some exciting things. Like I know this year, so where I've had to push myself out my comfort zone, one is recording a podcast again. Like even now, I'm recording video footage, don't really like it, don't like looking at myself, but equally I hope that what I'm doing is helpful. So that's what I focus on, is my reason why I'm doing what I'm doing. Okay, this is your reflection time. So when you look at some of the main areas that people set goals, there are classically 4 top goal categories. So the first is health, the second is wealth, the third is relationships. And again, when you look at the science, there's a strong correlation between the strength and positivity of those relationships and our happiness. And then meaningful work. So I guess the first question is, reflect which category your goal, dream, or ambition fits into. So is it health? Is it wealth? Is it relationships? Or is it meaningful work? So again, this year, I've been doing some realignment around doing meaningful work. I've been on this program the previous year and I lost my way, if I'm honest. And this year has really been recentering, realigning towards what really matters to me, which is optimizing other people's brilliance. And I'll explain why that's important in a sec. So if you were to reflect on each of those categories, so I'm going to read them out again. If you sat listening and you're not watching this on YouTube, what you're going to do is you're going to score it on a scale of 1 to 10. So 0 to 10, sorry. So 0 is we've got a lot of work to do. 10 is perfect. And if it's perfect, I would suggest that maybe it's not one for focus for the time being. So as you think about your health on a scale of 1 to 10, what number would you give that? And write it down. As you think about your wealth on a scale of 0 to 10, what number would you give that? Trust your instincts, first score that pops in your head. That'll be the right score because it's your unconscious score. Next category, relationships on a scale of 1 to 10. What number would you put on it? So think about, your relationships at work, relationships within your immediate family. So perhaps people that are in your household, broader family, friends. What's that like? And then the fourth category is meaningful work. So, how do you feel about the role that you're in? How do you feel about your business? How are you making a contribution to society? What's your higher purpose? So scale that out of 10, or score it, should I say, out of 10. The reason I get you to do that is to think about what, of those 4 areas, where might you want to set a goal, a dream, an ambition, and then pick one that you're going to work on. And actually, with all of this stuff, you can repeat the process and come back to this at a later date. Like when I think about my own vision and strategic plan and the goals that I've set for my business, my vision is about spending less time in the business. The reason being is my husband's retired, but I want to be able to help more people. So it sounds counterintuitive, but you can imagine. So with that vision, it is making me really think about my systems and procedures. I have been using AI in my business, for example, to edit my podcast, and thinking about how I can become more efficient, more effective, streamlining some of those processes. But also the podcast in itself, it's about helping more people. It's about reaching more people. And then so having those goals, and then beneath that sits a 1-page strategic plan. And that's basically my goals and then how I'm going to deliver those goals. So what are all the tasks involved? And I've been through, I'm trying to think how many plans I've had this year. I've probably been through about 3 1-page plans this year. And that's the beauty of keeping things simple, is that once you've cleared off a series of tasks, then you can replace it with another set, but with still the same goals and still the same vision in mind. As you think about those goal categories, so we've got health, wealth, relationships, and meaningful work, what would it be like if you were to score a 10 out of 10 in 12 months' time? And it might help to press pause at this point and to really imagine, like if my health was a 10 out of 10, what would that be like? What would you be doing that's different? If your wealth was a 10 out of 10, what would that enable for you? And wealth can be defined in many ways. If you listen to a previous podcast guest, Neil Jinks, he gave some really examples of alternative wealth. It's not just to do with the money that you've got in your bank or your assets. It's to do with, do you feel like you're leading a rich life? And I know since I relocated up to the lakes, I feel like I lead a life that's in, what do you call, what's the I'm trying to think of the term that you use, when it's in lots of colour when you go to the cinema. But basically, it just feels like our life is high octane and everything's stepped up. I love the beauty of the area, blah, blah, blah. You'll have seen it on my social media posts, but you get what I mean. And then when you think about your relationships, so if there are certain relationships that maybe have suffered this year, what would it be like if they were a 10 out of 10? So maybe if you've got a partner, it might mean going out more on date nights, or it might be finding your ideal partner. How exciting is that? And then when it comes to meaningful work, like from my perspective, I love my job. I really, really do love my job. But I have got, I'm privileged in that I can design what I do for a living. I choose. And if there's something I don't like doing it, I don't do it anymore. But it's back down to how do you make a difference? And we'll talk about that next. Because when it comes to a goal, we really need a strong reason why for that goal. If we don't have a strong reason why, do you know what? We're probably not going to achieve it, and we'll get here at the end of 2026 feeling the same and not having changed anything. So one of the things that you can do is ask yourself why 7 times. Now, I was used to asking why 5 times because I used to work for Johnson Controls, who fed into Toyota. So we were used to the Toyota problem solving technique, ask 5 whys, in order to get to the root. But you can also use it to help you to identify your purpose or your strong reason why for doing something. So when I sat down and worked out, well, why am I doing this podcast? Here's what came up for me. So I wanted to help listeners to not feel like I did. And I will explain where that comes from in a sec. I lacked confidence. I wanted to help listeners to realise that they're normal and they're not on their own. Originally, my podcast was called Exec Insider Secrets or something like that. That's terrible, isn't it? Leader Insider Secrets? Can't remember. I did start it back in 2020. But basically, it was about people being honest, sharing how they really feel, because I am privileged as a coach. I listen to the inner workings of people's minds. They tell me their innermost secrets, what they really think and feel. And I thought if there was a way of me getting guests onto the podcast, them sharing those feelings, and they're really successful people, they've done really well for themselves. Hopefully, it would reassure people to think, oh, actually, do you know what? Look at them. They feel just like me, which then leads me on to you realizing you can achieve pretty much anything that you want to achieve. Now, don't get me wrong. If you want to be a basketball player and you are not at a height advantage, then that might be a challenge. There's so much that we can achieve. There really, really is. I also wanted to help people believe in themselves. Belief, there is a strong correlation with belief and our performance. And again, the science demonstrates that. It demonstrates it through schooling as well. So students perform better, excuse me, when they feel believed in. But what I would say to you as well is that that belief has got to start first with you. The other thing as well, and again, this will become apparent when I share the reasoning behind this, is for people to realise that they can actually lead a happy and a successful life. It's never too late. When I think about some of the things, I'm 52, and for me, age just isn't a barrier. I just think, so what? I'm just going to, screw it. I'm going to do it. Yeah. So it's never too late. But obviously, back to what I was saying earlier, in order to make things better, you've got to feel empowered to act. You've got to take action. Otherwise, definition of insanity, again, we keep getting the same results. But ultimately, you know what's at the bottom of all of that? So I work with really amazing individuals, and often the thing that's getting in the way of their best performance, their best results, their best life is they don't feel good enough. So I guess relax and be easy. Most people don't feel good enough, but there are things that you can do to make yourself feel enough. And again, that's the background of this podcast. This is why I've put it together. So, my question to you, so this is where you press pause and you reflect. What are your 7 whys for this particular goal that you're going to set in 2026? So press pause and then we'll move on to the next bit. So the reason we need a strong why, so I want to explain really where all of this stuff comes from. So why do I like to optimize brilliance, for example? And what is all of that about? You know, how do I make a difference in the world? And for me, optimizing brilliance is about enabling people to, one, be their best selves in what they choose to do for a vocation, a career, in their business, so that they optimize their personal life. So that, you know, I really believe in leading your very best life. I think we're only here once. Let's make it a really good once. By doing well in your career, you can also help yourself to do well in your personal life. And let me explain the background to this. So meet my lovely parents, Annette and John, out this week. They were teenagers when they got married, and they were forced to marry because mum, I don't, well, you can see there, my mum's got a bun in the oven, and that bun's me. So back in the 70s, it wasn't the done thing. You didn't have a child out of wedlock. You either put them up for adoption or you got married. And my parents chose to get married. But you'll see there's a jagged line. Sadly, after 3 years, they got divorced. And, you know, my poor mum got really sad. She got depressed. She was lonely. And as a child, I can remember feeling helpless and thinking, how do I help her to lead a better life? We lived in this house here, and it was, when I look back at that little house now, we were so lucky. We had a roof over our heads. But growing up, and there's something to do with, and it's partly why I wrote about imposter syndrome, anything that makes us feel different, like an outsider, damages our confidence, our self-belief. And where we lived, our family was different. We were a single parent family. As I say, wasn't the done thing back in the 70s. And I remember a lad at school saying, so, do you live in a detached house? And I feel really embarrassed saying this, but I didn't really know what detached meant. I thought he meant attached. And I said, yeah, I live in a detached house. It wasn't, you can see it's a terraced house. But I had this big hang up about where I lived. Again, this will become relevant when we get onto the goal setting section. Back in the 80s, they didn't have the what's it called, child support agency, where they chase fathers for maintenance. So maintenance was always a bit bumpy. Sometimes we had it, sometimes we didn't, but it meant cash was tight. Added into the fact that I had learning difficulties, you know, undiagnosed, I suspect dyspraxia, dyscalculia, dyslexia, a combination of all of those things. So back in the 70s, they sat you on the thick table. So again, didn't feel good enough. Then, ta-da, an amazing opportunity. My mum took a job in the Lake District. We lived, so you can imagine, we went from this house to this amazing cottage in the Lake District. I absolutely loved it. All of a sudden, and this is ridiculous, it's so shallow, isn't it? I was measuring how I felt about myself, how good enough I felt by our house. And I felt good enough based on where we were living. But in truth, it wasn't our house. We were like Cinderella. My mum was a housekeeper, and we got to live in just that little bit of the house there. The rest of it, So that was the servants' quarters. And this bit was for guests. But then, sorry, back a step, I really, really loved my life in the Lake District. And this was where my best mate lived, in this hotel, Stores Hall. You know, we fraternised with all the guests. They were very wealthy. We'd go water skiing, all that kind of thing. Absolutely loved it. So I really had a taste of the high life. But then disaster struck. I got home one night and I was walking down this drive here and I could see my grandparents' car on the drive. It was midweek and I was thinking, that's a bit odd. They don't normally come during the week. It was winter. The house was lit up like a Christmas tree. Anyway, when I got in, everybody's faces were somber and I was like, what, what's going on here? It looks like somebody died or something. And my mum said, we are leaving and we are leaving now. And that was it. We ended up going back to our old life. So we relocated back to Lancaster. I had to go to a different school. I hated my new school. And the rest, as they say, is history. But what that grew in me was this burning ambition to relocate to the Lake District. And as you know, the rest is history. But this is an example of a dream, goal, ambition that, you know, it's back to we only live once. I really wish I'd done it sooner. So don't put it off. If you've got something that you want to achieve in 2026, let that be your year. So now let's move on to how we end up sabotaging our goals and what those mistakes are. Again, this is based on science. So the first one is setting vague or unrealistic goals. So our example was we decided we were going to move to the Lake District. Now, when we did our search, because we were so desperate, the royal we, it was me, I was just desperate to get back up north, back to the Lake District. When we started looking initially, we couldn't find the house that we liked within our budget. So we ended up broadening our search. We ended up looking in North Yorkshire, in Lancashire, the whole of the Lake District. Well, if you ever go on Rightmove, you'll see how many properties that delivers. So the result was we wasted loads of time, money, energy, emotion, doing the wrong things, and the goal took longer to achieve. And, you know, if I said to you, I got so desperate at one point that I said to my husband, come on, let's just move during the summer, let's rent somewhere, because I didn't want to disrupt my daughter's life and education the way in which mine had been disrupted. I wanted her to, because if you imagine it had been hanging over her head, imagine how unsettling it was for all that time. We're looking at all these different houses. She doesn't know where we're going to end up. So I was just like, come on, let's whip this plaster off. Let's get it over and done with. And we went to see one property to rent, this tiny pokey flat. And bear in mind, at the time, we had a massive slobbery dog, as well as our little smelly Frenchie. We drove 3 hours to view this property. We got there and the guy said, I'm really sorry, but you can't get into the property. It's been rented out as an Airbnb. It was just like, you what? And I was so determined that I ended up going and viewing a property that was being decorated and all that type of thing. But basically, we had a 3 hour round trip, not 3 hour, 6 hour round trip for nothing. So setting vague or unrealistic goals, that's the first self-sabotage mistake. Now, the next mistake is letting identity threats stop us. So this is where we compare ourselves socially. Social media is a nightmare for that, isn't it? You know, ooh, how's my competitor doing? Are they better? Are they worse? External evaluation. So being worried about how you're going to be perceived if you do something. So if I said to you, right, look at me, I've no makeup on, my hair's tied up in a scruffy ponytail, But I've got to the point where I just thought, oh, do you know what? I need to get this off my chest. I need to record this podcast. Let's just crack on ski. So I'm just not going to look at myself. And then it's the fear of failure. How often do we worry about not being successful at something so we don't do anything at all? That was the same with me writing my book. You'll see here, 2009, that's when I started wanting to write a book. It wasn't published until 2022. So it took me 10 years before I started writing again. But the other thing as well is I let the opinion of one person put me off. So I wrote a book, or started writing a book, should I say, in 2009. I handed it out for a review and I let the comment of one person put me off altogether. And I stopped writing because it made me feel not good enough, or I allowed it to make me feel not good enough. The third self-sabotage mistake is relying on motivation. How often do we not have the energy or the motivation to do something? You know, going back to we're working on improving our fitness again. So it's not that we'd stopped altogether, it's just that we weren't doing it as routinely as we should be doing. So like yesterday morning, I'm not kidding, it was so dark, it was that stair rod rain. We were both pretty tired. I think we've been fighting a cold. But do you know what? We still did it. So, how do we use motivation and energy to our advantage so that we make sure we do the things that we need to do that are going to take us closer to our goal? So, those of you that know me will know I worked so hard early on in my career that I ended up with chronic fatigue and ME. This is this picture here, and I had so much anxiety and stress in the background just because I didn't feel good enough. This was me in America, in New York, and I couldn't get on the boat. I'm laughing now. I couldn't get on the boat because I was having a panic attack because I was so anxious because I was workaholic, been working too hard. So yeah, I've got my plastic smile on there. And then ultimately, it resulted in when I had my daughter, I got a bacterial infection and that triggered ME. And the moment I realised I'd pushed myself too far was when I got sick. Funnily enough, we're here in the Lake District. And I couldn't push the pram up the hill. I'd got no energy. It was really weird. So the result was relying on motivation, relying on having sufficient energy meant that my motivation was affected, not through lack of will, but because I had no energy. And so even climbing the stairs was difficult. But obviously, I recovered, but I needed to make some changes. So the next mistake or self-sabotage mistake is procrastination and delaying action. So this is me when I used to work for the Smith Partnership in Derby, I was head of HR. I'd had ambitions to run my own business since I was a little girl. I came from, I guess, a family of business owners, entrepreneurs, and as a right saddo as a kid, my favourite game growing up was making perfume. So I used to love organising and running a little perfume factory, and then we would make money from it. So whilst I was working as the head of HR, I trained and qualified as a coach. And whilst all my contemporaries were, designing logos, hiring business premises, leaving the jobs, it took me 2 years before I left my role because I was procrastinating, delaying setting up my business because I was afraid it wasn't going to work out. And procrastination is a killer of action, isn't it? And I was dealing with someone just the other day, and they had been struggling to get sales in. And the reason being is they were concerned about picking up the phone, speaking to customers, but also about getting their answers wrong or being wrong. or making mistakes or failing. And when we tracked back, so this relates to the process that I'm going to be sharing with you shortly, we have to let go of those inner limitations, which are often created in our childhood. Those inner limiting beliefs, we have to let go of them. And once we've done that, all of a sudden, this person's not procrastinating and they're picking up phone calls in quick succession. So, yes, that's one of the things that's going to get in the way of your goal. So, just before we go on to the next thing that sabotages our success, I'm going to share with you actually three major life goals that I set. And if you've been following me for a while, you know I'm a big fan of drawing. It helps cement the goal, the vision in my mind. And when I first set up my business, this relates back to what I was saying earlier about why houses are important. You know, I felt an element of shame where we lived, which was really unnecessary. You know, we were so lucky that my mum was able to put a roof over our head and that we were warm, we were safe, we were dry. We had food on the table, we were lucky. But as I say, the ego part of me wanted a better house growing up. And so I drew this house when I first set up my business, which was 20 years ago. So if you're just listening to this, what I'll try and describe what the house looks like. It's a classic doll's house. So, you know, door in the middle, 3 stories, yeah, and that's it. The other major life goals included getting a boat. So for those of you that are not watching, there's a really rubbishy drawing of the lake. This was Lake Windermere, and there's a boat on it. But also I'm circling the hills because this represents us moving to the Lake District. Now, I share that with you because it relates to the next thing that's going to sabotage your success or your goal of success. So the fifth thing that gets in the way of us achieving our goals is instant gratification. So choosing short-term rewards over longer-term goals. So back to, and this is an example, so hopefully you can relate. So when I left home at 21, I bought this flat in the West End of Morecambe. The value was 21,000. It was in a deprived area of Morecambe. I chose the top floor flat so that I was out of the way of the drunkenness on the street, etc., etc. Then we relocated to Derby and we bought this semi-detached house, my husband and I, for just under 60,000. Then we moved to an aspirational estate, so even when we lived in our semi-detached house, I used to drive past this estate that was further on in the village. And my husband and I would go, oh, we want to live there one day. And so we bought this house here. It was finally our first detached house for 210,000. Then we had aspirations. Our daughter was coming up for school and we wanted her to go to a small village school. We wanted her to experience country life. But the other thing that we wanted to do, because going back to our detached house, which was worth 210,000 back then, we had paid the mortgage off. And I said to my husband, look, if we want to move up to the Lake District, we agreed we needed, so this was back probably in about 2013, we thought we need a pot of about 500,000. And that should be enough for us to buy the house that we want, for my husband to retire comfortably and for us to be mortgage free again. So we bought this house. This is the classic doll's house for 430,000. That was a tick in the box for the vision board. That was great. But I got frustrated along the way. And also remember, we've got this ambition to own a boat. So what we did whilst we lived in that house is we bought our boat, Lady B. That gave us access to the Lake District. I think my husband thought it would stem my desire to relocate to the Lake District. And all it did is it reinforced it. It just made me think, oh my God, I really need to live up here. So we bought Lady B. How funny was that? We didn't know she was called Lady B until we signed the paperwork, because my business name is called B. So we bought Lady B, but what this did, this was an example of instant gratification, because it meant that it took us longer to pay the mortgage off, and something else occurred as well. There was a dip in my husband's pension as well, which meant that he couldn't retire. So the idea was that we would relocate once our daughter finished junior school, so when she was due to change schools. So remember, I wanted to minimize the disruption for our daughter. I'll explain what happened in the next part of this presentation, but the ultimate result of instant gratification is that we had to wait another 3 years before we could relocate. So going back to what I was saying earlier, I wish we'd done it earlier. In some respects, if we'd not bought the boat, we could have lived up here a lot sooner. And it was funny, the other day we were driving to a Christmas market and we drove past the marina where we used to moor our boat, and it was stare or drain again. And I said, oh my goodness, I said, I really don't. I loved the boat at the time, absolutely loved it. We've got so many happy memories, but I wouldn't want to be on a boat now. It was cold, damp, and miserable sometimes. But yeah, anyway. So I'll get on to what happened next in a moment. So if you found this stuff interesting and you want to work through the process that I'm going to be sharing with you. So I work with businesses using the clear process that I'm going to share with you. If you've got a big goal, ambition, either personally or for your business or as a head of your department, and you want to work with me on a one-to-one, or maybe a bit like I'm doing at the moment, I'm working with a group of leaders that are looking to take their business to the next level, drop me a line and book a free discovery call, and we can talk through whether the optimized leader program next level is a fit for you. It's a no obligation chat. Seriously, I will be honest and explain whether I can help you, but equally there's no obligation on your part. So if you are watching, you'll see there's a QR code on screen. Alternatively, just head over to Estelle Read, and Read is spelled read as in a book, estelleread.com, and you'll see on my website you can book a free 15-minute, no obligation discovery. So that brings us to the end of part 1, the hidden ceiling, keeping your goals out of reach, which is included the top 5 self-sabotage mistakes. So next week, you will be able to listen to part 2, which is the transformation piece, and I will be running you through my 5-step clear framework to prevent that self-sabotage and help you accelerate your goal achievement. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to be notified when the next episode drops, remember to subscribe. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with someone who might benefit. Finally, if any of these topics have sparked your interest and you'd like to work with me, you can apply for a free discovery call at estelleread.com. Let's see if we're a good fit. You'll also find plenty of free resources there. I'm Estelle Read, executive coach, speaker, and best-selling author, and this has been the Optimising Your Brilliance podcast. Thanks for listening. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered professional advice. Please consult with a qualified professional for any specific advice related to your situation.